Hi everybody and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. My name is Hannah Monroe, your host, and with me today is Jack. So Jack is the founder and president of the CFO Leadership Council. He's a Forbes contributor and author of the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, which is based upon conversations with dozens of elite CFOs from Silicon Valley startups to Fortune 50 multinationals. He's also served as a CFO to 26 different companies. So he is a font of all knowledge, as I'm sure you'll find out as we go through this conversation. So welcome, Jack. It's lovely to have you on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for asking me. It's great to be here. I don't think anyone has ever called me a font of knowledge before. So now the pressure's on. I hope I just don't disappoint your audience.
Absolutely. Well, we've got high standards, but I'm sure you won't disappoint. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about your journey and, how you ended up doing what you're doing at the moment?
Sure. I started out, a relatively conventional path to becoming a CFO. And I studied accounting in undergraduate. And then I worked for, back in my day, it was the big 8 accounting firms. It was Peat, Marwick, and Mitchell, which your generation knows as KPMG. And yes, that's how old I am, Peat, Marwick, and Mitchell. And so I worked for them. Then I left, actually. I took a job as a controller with one of my clients in the tech industry. Worked there for 5 years. And then I went back and got my MBA. And then I came out of the MBA. I got my first job as a CFO at another startup. And eventually I ended up working at 26 different companies, largely because there's an industry, there's sort of a sub-industry within the tech space that a lot of companies that are small and growing, they need the talents of a CFO, but not a full-time CFO. So often I would work for 2 or 3 companies at the same time as a CFO. So yeah, it sounds like a lot of companies when you say 26, but if you said each one of them is a third, I really probably worked for 7 or 8 different companies as a CFO. So
yeah, I was going to say 26 is a lot to fit into a lifetime, to be fair.
How old is this guy? Along the way, I started the CFO Leadership Council just because, I wanted to create a peer network. And so I just started an organization for my peers, and I ended up liking doing it. It's been my full-time job now for several years. So it's been a lot of fun. So I've had a fun run.
Awesome. And obviously in your job, you're talking to lots of different CFOs from all different industries. So what are some of the challenges that you're hearing from, those peers and those people in those networks?
Sure. And, the challenges this year have been, unprecedented. CFOs and their teams, it's the greatest challenge of their careers. And, I sort of joke with them a little bit, like, if I knew any people who were CFOs during the Spanish flu epidemic, I'd make an introduction to you. But, most of those people have passed on, unfortunately. But so we're learning as we go and, doing the best we can. But there's not a playbook for running a company during a global economic crisis because, people who are working haven't been through anything like this. You probably remember in the early days, it was simply, survive and keep the team sane for a couple of weeks. And we were saying survive and then thrive. But, there's great opportunities out there. And history shows us that, if nothing else, the companies that adapt and evolve and come up with some great ideas during crises, those are the ones that are going to thrive. If you sort of roll up into the fetal ball position, you're probably going to stay there forever and your company's not going to make it. And if you think you're going to have the same business model when things return to normal, probably not. Right now is the chance to rethink everything and just come out basically almost a rebirth of your company, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And in terms of that change, that's a massive piece, isn't it, for people to be going through? And from my perspective, and I think yours as well, is that CFO role is so critical in that transformation. So why do you think the CFO is so critical during the current crisis?
Yeah, and it's interesting because the CFOs of a generation ago, of which I am one, so I'm not knocking anyone, but they wouldn't have been able to handle this as well as the current generation of CFOs. And the reason is CFOs today, they're strategic thinkers, they're great leaders, and they work cross-functionally. And I would argue with a certain exception of the CEO and a possible exception of the senior HR people, the CFO job is the most cross-functional. And that's why they're so critical to the success of the company, because they've literally got their fingers in everything. It's product development, sales, and marketing. CFOs are absolutely involved in those roles. And, also fundamentally, this is a financial crisis. So unless the CEO of the company is a former CFO, you're probably the only financial expert on the team. So, you're an invaluable part of the team. And, the crisis has simply raised the visibility and the recognition of how critical the CFO role is to an organization's ongoing success.
Absolutely. And I think there's certainly from the people that I'm speaking to, there's more of an understanding of the importance of having a strong finance leadership in terms of this crisis. And I think what's really interesting is that it's not necessarily just cost controlling that's critical during this piece. And I'd be interested to understand what you think are the sort of the aspects of the role and the things that CFOs need to think about during the current times.
Cash flow is a big thing right now because, a lot of companies are, candidly, a lot of them have lost their customers, right? If you're in the wrong industry. But I advise people, one of the best things you can do, and again, if you're in a position to do it, this is really a time to flex your muscles. Because, if you are in a game, say you're in an industry and there are 5 or 6 dominant companies in your industry. Well, there's a really good chance when things get back to normal, only 3 of you are going to survive. So, make sure that you're one of those 3, flex your muscles. And to CFO's credit, a lot of them are doing exactly that. Like it would be easy to actually say, okay, let's slow down on our capital expenditures. But that bears long-term fruit. That would be a huge mistake. And most CFOs are actually doing the exact opposite. They're now investing in technologies more than maybe they would have before. They're investing in, say, automation tools because they can bring efficiency and a long-term competitive advantage. And again, I think the ones that do that look beyond the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might be, and actually look to the long term, develop the team that they need to survive and invest in the technologies in other areas. I think those are the ones that are going to do their companies the best service. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point because there is that fear, isn't there? As soon as something hits that people go, oh, let's just stop as much spending as possible. But actually, like you say, if they can do it well, then actually they're going to give themselves a strategic advantage moving forwards. And certainly coming out of this crisis, the ability to scale quickly when things, I won't say go back to normal, but actually go back to a more positive shift. Being able to grow quickly is going to be, really vital for some of those firms at least.
Yeah, it's not going to be like this forever. I don't know. At one point I thought we'd sort of start the return to normalcy would be next spring. Now I'm thinking it's next fall. I only know that whatever prediction I make is likely to be wrong. But, at some point, the economy is going to be robust and growing again. And you need to be there. You in the company, and you need to keep the team together, and you need to keep your customers, your employees, and your stockholders inspired by the potential of the company when things get back to normal, because they will. And there's going to be, when we come out of the economic slowdown, it's going to be an incredible growth period for a couple of years as we sort of make up for lost time. At least that's what history tells us. So coming out of a recession is always a really strong growth period.
And I'd be interesting to see and what do you think actually? Do you think that the current situation is actually going to change the role of the CFO or the viewpoint of that CFO?
Yeah, it had been changing anyway, but it's raising its visibility. And a lot of CFOs, the jobs I mentioned, it's inherently cross-functional. But that said, sometimes they get a little bit of resistance to being cross-functional, and it's only nature. I remember early in my career, my first boss, my first job, I was an accountant, not as a CFO, but the marketing people used to call the accounting people bean counters. I assume, is that a known expression over in the UK?
Yep. Yes, it is.
That wasn't really helpful, but they didn't really like us asking questions about marketing investment. But like my boss, who was really an old school guy, he called marketing arts and crafts. And right to their face too. At least they have the courtesy to call us bean counters behind our back. He would just say, so what's going on in arts and crafts? He had just utter disdain. And, I think in this crisis, as marketing people have actually seen what a value add finance can be and how strategic the right CFO can be. And sales and other things as well. It's just a great opportunity. I've had, more than a handful of CFOs have told me the most important thing that they've done during the crisis is simply over communicate. And there's probably in your own world, you've seen it too, but out of the executive team, which executive do you think is the most trusted, generally speaking? And it's usually the CFO, right? It's the CFO and then the CEO. Sales and marketing, it's not like people don't trust them, but he's in marketing, he's spinning things. But people don't perceive that CFOs are spinning things. So if a CFO looks that actually goes with the salesperson to the critical customers and said, "This is why you need to stand by us. We're going to emerge from this stronger than ever." It's actually more meaningful coming from the CFO than it is from the VP of sales, largely simply because of title. So, people are recognizing, geez, I need to bring the CFO on my customer calls going forward. He or she's got incredible, credibility day one, even though they don't know them. So, that's a powerful weapon, I think.
And absolutely. And do you know what? That's a really interesting concept, the relationships between the CFO and the rest of the organization. Because I was on a call or the other day where they were talking about that relationship between the CFO and the rest of the organization, and how that has or needs to change or needs to shift. So have you seen a shift over your time working as a CFO and doing what you're doing now in that relationship between the CFO and other teams within the organization?
Yeah, it's absolutely more cross-functional. And a friend of mine, Judy Romano, she's a long-term member. She launched our Atlanta chapter. And, she advises first-time CFOs. And it's like, don't think of yourself as a financial executive. Think of yourself as a cross-functional executive who happens to be a financial expert. And market yourself individually that way, that you're a problem solver, a strategic thinker. If they think you're a finance and accountant type person, they're not going to embrace you as being part of the overall strategy. So the days of, I'll make a good reference for you, Bob Cratchit from A Christmas Carol, he was the accountant. Most people don't get that right away. But like a lot of people, tend to think of CFOs like Bob Cratchit, that all they do is count the numbers. And while that's probably an invaluable skill for CFOs to have, the fact is they're delegating that now. They're a critical part of the strategic team. So. And the other, one thing I mentioned, I don't know if you read my book or not, but, one of the things I mentioned, one of the CFOs I spoke to, she early in her career, she actually took on a mentor. She worked at one of the big multinational consumer companies, and she was a controller. She wanted to become a CFO. So she took on a mentor, a VP of sales, rather than just a more senior financial executive, which was pretty savvy because she thought if she brought a customer-focused approach to financial leadership, that would give her an edge in her career. And she's certainly not appropriate to say who, but she's done extraordinarily well throughout her career. The other thing is she told me, and this year that was probably invaluable. She has made it a point. She's had, I think, 3 or 4 CFO jobs now. She actually calls the CFOs at her 10 largest customers when she gets the job. Not selling, she's just building a relationship with them. Hey, if there's anything I can do, if things aren't going well, I just want you to know I'm here and, call me directly. And she didn't do it for that reason, but what a great thing that is to have done during the pandemic, right? Customers still buying, but geez, let me call Bob. I've known Bob for 3 years. It's great that they're buying. Bob, what's your liquidity position? You're going to pay for this when the invoice comes due. If not, what can I do to help you? Those sorts of things. So it's an easier conversation when you've known the person before the crisis, I think.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a really interesting point because finance tends to be hidden behind a lot of the rest of the organization. And actually, is there an argument that, because the only time that customers speak to finance is when they're asking for money. So is there a point? It's true.
Yeah.
So is there a point where actually, when we talk about the changing role of finance and with all the automation that comes around credit control now, you don't chase an email, you don't chase an invoice manually. You pick up the phone and have a conversation, or you automate the other elements. So should that person be more of a front end customer facing person that enjoys speaking to customers before the invoice is due, rather than just after? That's something I never thought about.
It's tough when you just call someone and say, "Hey, Jerko, your 15 days late. By the way, let me introduce myself to you.
Yeah,
But,
I'm
like,
a really nice person, honest.
Yeah, but you owe me money, so I'm gonna, be a jerk. But like I remember, in my days as a CFO, my involvement with customers often was fundamentally the deal was done. I'm just negotiating final terms. So, is it due in 30 or 45 days? Is it, FOB destination or FOB shipping? I don't know if that's even a thing anymore. But it's just, when does title to a physical product take place is what FOB is referenced to. It was things like that. It wasn't really substantive type of things that, are involved with the customers. You're often talking to the lawyers or the CFO at the other company. But it wasn't part of any ongoing strategic relationship with your customers. And now today, the best CFOs are, definitely involved with their customers. I did a survey recently through LinkedIn, and it was, it was 100 people responded. So, it wasn't the most robust, but, I asked, how would you describe your relationship with your customers? And it's deeply involved, minimally involved, only involved at the end, and not involved at all. And the top two are the most common answers. So it's definitely an evolution that, CFOs are part of the sales process.
That's really interesting. And I guess with that shift in terms of how involved they are, that requires a different set of skills, doesn't it? It's that that shift from, like you say, bean counter to strategic visionary, and that gravitas that comes with it.
You're right. That's what it's all about. And there are the bean counter roles still exist, right? And one of the most common paths to being a controller, to being a CFO, is a controller first. And that's a person. Every great CFO I know has a great controller, and it's a critical thing. In fact, that same woman I mentioned that called the 10 CFOs, she said the reason she's able to do a lot of strategic and leadership things is she's got a great controller behind her, and if she doesn't, she'll do what she needs to do to make a swap out or whatever. She just, I think the analogy is she needs someone to make the train run on time. She can't worry about that. She's got other things to focus on. So.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the finances have got to be right. That's the one thing that can't be wrong in a business, is that the finances have to be right. But I guess the responsibility for that ultimately sits with the CFO, but they're not the one that's doing that on a day-to-day basis. And you need to have your trusted second that can deliver on that piece, that you can go away and do what is the new role of the CFO rather than sort of the general day-to-day accounting.
Yeah, it's a tough one because you're still ultimately, in the United States, if you're a public company, you're the one signing the financial statements, right?
Yeah.
They're accurate, and you're working with the auditors, and if you get it wrong, that's pretty difficult. In fact, there was a local company in Massachusetts, I won't say who, but there was some like very massive financial statement restatements. This was several years ago. And the guy, to the point there was an SEC investigation, Securities and Exchange Commission. And like his defense was, basically he kind of said he wasn't responsible because he was a strategic CFO. And it's great that he's a strategic CFO, but that didn't really absolve. What kind of thinking is that, right? I mean, I'm a strategic CFO, so then I'm not responsible for the numbers. Leave me alone. That wasn't a very strategic thing for him to have said, even if he deep down, if he really thinks it, that, talk to my controller, it's not my problem. Maybe the guy thinks it, I don't know, but what a stupid thing to say.
But it's the same with the CEO, because the CEO is still responsible for the success of a business, regardless of whether he keeps, he actually does the numbers. He's still responsible. It's the same with the CFO. He's responsible for choosing the person that's looking after the day-to-day.
Yeah. You can't say, don't talk to me about it. Just talk to that other jerk. It's not really my problem. That's what I hired him to do. So, it's not really going to please the SEC, I wouldn't think. So
no, and I don't think any auditor over here would take that as a good excuse.
Yeah, well, that's kind of how I know about it. I knew the auditor, and I'm just thinking that there must have been like lawyers who were representing stockholders that were going to sue the company that were like, okay, I've got my smoking gun. Right. The CFO genuinely doesn't believe that he's responsible for this sort of thing. So,
gosh,
what the heck? That's just nonsense. So,
yeah.
But anyway.
But I guess that then, if you're going to be able to step away and do that strategic CFO role, you've got to really trust that person that is looking after that day to day. And have you got any advice for anyone that's looking for that good person, the one they could trust?
Yeah, hire somebody that's good enough to do your job, and somebody who's ambitious, who wants to be a CFO. And by the way, mentor them, and help them develop on the path from controller to CFO. The bad news is you're going to lose that person, right? Because eventually they're going to learn, everything they can learn from you. They're going to grow under you, and they're going to be recognized, and they're going to get a CFO opportunity of their own. But the good news is you've got a phenomenal person who's going to be extremely grateful for the opportunity to work for you and very loyal to you for their career. So I would say, it is largely the hiring process. Technical skills are great, but look for a person who's ambitious, who wants to grow, and then empower them to do so. Give them challenging work, push them out of their comfort zone. So.
No, that's great advice. And I was talking to Sydney on one of the previous episodes, and he said one of the Sydney Finkelstein, who's professor at Dartmouth Tuck School of Business, and he was saying that.
Now, what does he know?
I know, we only research about it.
Yeah. I went to Sloan, so Tuck's my national enemy.
Oh, is there a bit of rivalry? I don't know.
No, not really. Actually, I applied to Tuck and they turned me down. So.
Oh, that's not good.
We can eliminate this part of the video.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
we'll just
cut
this bit out.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he was saying that one of the best things you can do when you first either go into a role or with your new recruit is actually ask them where they want to be, and actually you become that person that's going to help leverage their career and drive it forwards, because then, like you say, you have that loyalty and you have that trust with them, and then they're more willing to go on your journey with you, through all the challenges that we're experiencing at the moment, any change. Actually, by tying your success to theirs, you're able to get the best out of them, which, sounds obvious, but that I think that's such a good piece.
Hello, you there?
I don't know that many people do that, or if they don't, they should be, to be very fair. Is there any other top tips or thoughts that you have on, building your team, and what do you think the finance team of the future is going to look like?
Yeah, it's going to be in terms of the, building the team. I tell people, look for people who are intellectually curious, passionate, that share your work ethic, that, basically want to grow professionally. You look for those professionals. And someone once told me, don't build the team you need today. Look 3 to 5 years out and build the team for that company. And because, if you're on a growth curve or your company's evolving for whatever reason, look for the people that have all the qualities that are going to, grow in that company. So, maybe overhire a little bit. It's difficult to do. If all you need today is an accounts payable clerk, it's very tempting to just go out and hire an accounts payable clerk, right? But if you look to the future a little bit, maybe you want to hire, somebody that can bring a little bit more to the table rather than that skill set. So, just think about what the company's going to look like a few years out. And in terms of, you also asked me about, what the role of finance is going to be in the future. I think it'll continue to be, it's gone from being a cost center to a value add. It's going to remain very, very cross-functional. It's going to be very strategic. It will be on the cutting edge from a technology standpoint. As it turns out, financial people tend to actually be technical whizzes as well, which is why in a lot of companies, chief information officers or directors of IT actually report into CFOs. So I think you're going to see them as innovators, problem solvers, and they're going to remain cross-functional. And more, you're actually going to see more CFOs who are going to get promoted into the CEO role. It used to be a relatively rare occurrence that a CFO would get promoted to the top job. And, now it's not the norm, but it's becoming more and more common, particularly during a financial crisis. And the thing is, they're doing great. They're very, very successful in the role, which, sets up other CFOs to take the reins and do really well. So, and there have been, they're like Best Buy, for example. They promoted their CFO. Her first name's Corey. I forget her last name, but she was the CFO and she was promoted to the CEO. Fortune 100 company. But, there aren't that many companies bigger than Best Buy. So to think that, they went from a CFO to a CEO, and by the way, she's rocking it by all accounts through, what's a really challenging time for retail. So, every time you hear a CFO succeeding as a CEO, it's just going to create more opportunities for CFOs.
Well, interesting enough, Steve Hare, who is who was CFO of Sage, got promoted internally into that CEO role of the global Sage organization. Mm-hmm. So, and he has actually just been ranked, I think it's number 1 on Glassdoor in the UK for CEO. So it's a huge achievement. And he's getting some massive kudos for his work and his leadership through the crisis. So, I'd be really interested to see, if it doesn't happen more often. Particularly, obviously, given the current situation. So what is it? Is it the financial background you think that encourages that promotion during a financial crisis?
Yeah, it used to be, and not that long ago either, like 10 or 15 years. But for the most part, if a CFO was promoted to the top job, it's actually because the company was in a financial crisis, and they decided that that was just the skill set that was needed if the company was going to survive. But now, with CFOs with a broader range of skill sets, with problem-solving abilities, it just makes sense to at least consider putting him in the top role. There's a really good reason to go with a VP of sales because he or she interacts with the customers and knows what their mindset is more than other people. But it's not the only path to it. And, I'm guessing also, like in the case of Best Buy and some others, they're public companies. She was probably extremely credible with Wall Street, as they say. Forget what the equivalent for you is, but, if the Wall Street analysts
stock exchange.
Yeah, there you go. But, that's a huge thing, right? Rather than bringing an outsider who, doesn't know the business really well, may or may not be as well respected on Wall Street. Why not bring in somebody that's been talking to Wall Street analysts for Best Buy? And I don't know her role beforehand at all. I'm speculating here. But, presumably Wall Street supported the promotion when she was brought in. So, it makes sense to do that, I think. So.
Absolutely. And I guess because the CFO role is becoming so much more strategic, that actually they're able to make that shift a lot easier. So, with the past perception of we keep using this term bean counter, we've got to find another one, but with that view of the CFO as that person changing, then I guess that is going to open up more opportunities for CFOs.
Absolutely.
To do that.
You wanted another one. A guy gave me an analogy. He told me accountants were like, if business was war, accountants were like the guys with the bayonets. They'd come up to a body lying on the ground and stab it to make sure the person was really dead. Real flattering, right? Yeah.
That's a new one.
You never heard that? Yes. Just, you don't do any fighting. You just stab the dead bodies to make sure that they're really dead.
Yeah, just clean up after the mess that everybody else makes.
Yeah, exactly. It is kind of, because it's certainly like in pop culture, whenever there's a character who's an accountant, they're always portrayed as really kind of nerdy. And, like any profession, sure, there are some nerdy accountants and there are nerdy engineers and there are nerdy salespeople too. But yeah, they certainly don't have the best reputation. Norm from Cheers is probably the best known accountant in American fiction. I don't know if you remember the TV show Cheers. Norm was the guy he was in the bar every day of his life drinking. And by profession, he was an accountant. So that's what they thought of accountants in Boston, I guess. So,
yeah, driven to drink, obviously.
Yeah, and I'm not quite that old, but I was an accountant in Boston during the 80s when that show was on. So I knew one or two Norms back in my day. I'll say that. So.
Yeah, I must admit, historically, that is the picture of people working in finance, is that they are number geeks, and and I think there are still quite a few number geeks in the finance team, but not necessarily in the CFO role, because that shift, doesn't it?
It definitely does. And yeah, by the way, I wouldn't call my many friends accountants who are geeks, but just for the record, she said it, not me. But there are.
Hey, I'm a self-concessed, I'm a numbers girl, so I'm quite happily hold my hands up and say I'm a geek.
Well, yeah, I'm a numbers boy myself too. I do, from childhood, just analyzing stats and sports and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. But, there's absolutely a role for that, and it's a needed part of financial reporting. It just, again, finance, it used to literally be a cost center. And, now it's, there's still cost to it. Not many CFOs are actually, while they're involved in sales, they don't have a quota or anything like that, nor should they. But they're bringing, genuine value beyond just reporting the facts that happened after they happened. They're now actually making it happen, or at least helping with the path to make it happen. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a lovely, thing to talk about, is that actually finance should be an enabler, not a barrier within the organization. And I love that concept of finance as helping, other parts of the organization achieve, rather than telling them no and you can't have that. I think that's an important point. So what would you say to CFOs, going back to our original topic of CFOs in crisis? So what would you say are the top tips for CFOs in this challenging times? What do they need to really consider as we go through this COVID situation?
Yeah, over communicate with everybody that you have to do, and make sure you're talking to your team. They feel safe, because while in a lot of sectors the economy is doing pretty well, there are people, still struggling. There are industries that, the company may or may not survive, and, that type of thing. And just be sensitive to everybody's situation too. You're not trying to, cut into people's personal business, but trust your employees. They're going to do the right thing by you. And, they're not going to do it between the 9 to 5 hours of whatever it is that your company's work. But you hired a good team, presumably. Trust them to get their work done and be respectful. I work for a very small company, and every situation is different. I've got a single mom. I've got, one of my employees takes care of elderly parents. I've got a lot of people who are parents, and suddenly they're teaching lessons to their kids during the workday. I myself am the father of 2 special needs children, so I'm not available between 8 and 9:30, because I'm driving them to school, because I don't want them on a bus. Your entire team, they have their own unique challenges. Just be respectful of that. If you hired well over the last several years, you've just got to trust them that they're going to get everything done. And in my case, and in the case of just about everybody I talked to, it's been a non-issue. I feel bad. I'm getting emails from my coworkers. I see that, they sent it at 11:30 at night, but you know what? They got the job done, and that's what worked for them. So it won't be like this forever. So anyway, over communicate with the team, let them know that they're important, and just, always tell the truth, but always project to share an air of confidence and optimism. When's this going to end? I wish I knew, because I'd be a very, very wealthy man if I did. But it is going to end. Make the strategic decisions. You're going to emerge stronger than ever on the other side of COVID.
Absolutely. And that is an amazing way to finish the podcast. So thank you so much, Jack. That has been really insightful. And I'm sure our listeners have taken a huge amount away from today. And if they want to, see your book, or download your book, or, get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Sure. If you want to send me an email, it's simply jack@cfolc.com. Happy to send you a PDF of the book for free. If you want to get a printed copy, it's rockstarcfos.com. And I don't control that one. You have to buy it. Or you can get it on Amazon too, I think. So I'm pretty sure.
Well,
you think I might know that? I don't know.
You just wrote the thing. You don't have to do anything after that. You're all good. So, thank you so much, Jack. It's been wonderful. And fabulous to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. I enjoyed it. So.